Well, I'm back. So, on your laptop, there's a button that has the camera, and I've had this discussion with my technologically proficient husband before, and I had it turned on, I thought, but apparently somehow it got turned off. So, after looking through all the different, you know, device settings and this and that, and he says, "Oh, your camera's turned off." So, should you have the same problem, just check the button on the side if you have a NV laptop, which I do. So here we are, chapter 12, The Phoenix and the Falcon. As I always say, you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it from me. I'm an Amazon bookseller. And so, of course, I have this as a collectible book on my site. Anyway, chapter 12, Helena she's riding with Huns, you know, and they're not especially well regarded by civilized society because they're marauders. They take what they want, and they have their own code, and it's not the code of people in Constantinople where she grew up. But she's with Volodymyr, who's pretty a good guy. She's lucky he had been looking for her, like the story of the lost heiress, and root his maraudings. He found her, and as we know, tragically her son was killed by Julia, who is you know the bad guy of the book, basically. So chapter 12. The Huns pounded northward. With their camp followers, they were more than 400 strong. Their direction took them close to the village that had been Cansbar's pride. Each stride brought Lena closer to the birds, black against the blue sky, ravens mixed with buzzards, shrieking with piercing cries. The ruined village was out of sight, blocked from view by the slight incline. Thin trails of smoke wavered in the wind, the aftermath of burning. Lena saw the shape of a person abandoned near the ridge of the hill. Birds surrounded it, but at a distance, waiting for the safety of death. Her reaction was immediate. Closing the small gap between Pasiel and the roan stallion, she snapped her horse's rein from Valamir's hand. His eyes were alert. His mouth was a frown. "What are you doing?" She gestured toward the birds and reined Pasiel to a halt. "I'll be back." The horsemen thundered past. Valamir glared at her. His eyes were impatient with anger. The wagons, following more slowly, offered Helena and Valamir a moment's solitude in the empty space between the two sections of the tribe. She did not waste time on explanations, but urged Pasiel into a gallop toward the bird's prey. He pursued her, shouting, "No!" As Valamir reached for Pasiel's reins, Helena performed the same maneuver she had used when Giulia had pursued her. Sitting back on the white stallion, she signaled him to halt and pressed her right leg against his side, making him yield left. It worked. The roan ran ahead. As Valamir wheeled his mount, he called to her, "Helena, most men would beat you for this." With an affectionate grin, she reined in Pasiel and waited for Valamir. Trying not to smile, he shook his head. Still mounted, he pulled her from his horse, holding her tightly in his arms. "Don't do that again," he said. His mouth on hers, she softened against him, not fighting, the passionate embrace. He kissed her forehead and her hair, and whispered, "By the gods, I thought you were bolting." Her hand touched his hair, then his cheek. "You're real and solid, speaking to something in me, but I don't know who I am or what I feel, except things make sense again when I'm with you." He kissed her gently and pulled away. "Why did you run off like that?" he demanded. Her eyes did not flinch. "I told you." "You said nothing." "I pointed to the bird. Someone's alive over there." He looked troubled and stubborn. "You may not see it. I'm going." "You forget, Helena, that you're on my horse and in my arms." "I won't beg, Valamir, but I must." He stared toward the tribe. The horsemen were obscured by dust and the sun. The camp followers, several hundred feet off, had come abreast of their position. They both could see Karachapan veering away, heading in their direction. The pack horses plodded behind the wagon. Sorrel, prancing to the side, was restive from the slow pace. "He's like a mother to you," Valimir stated with a wry shake of his head. His eyes narrowed and his lips pursed. He said strange words to Giulia. Then Karachapan was at your arm. Beside himself with worry. "Why?" Lena was silent for a moment. I risked judgment by answering. I cursed Giulia. Half to himself, he said, "I could feel it." "I wondered if you could," she replied. "It was no more than what he deserves. But something happened when I said the words. It frightened me." She paused and looked toward the distance. "Please let me see who the birds circle. I'll be haunted by not knowing." He studied her with keen eyes and shrugged and looked away. "If that's what you want, but you'll regret it." He swung her behind him and called to Karachapan, "Catch your stallion and wait. We'll be quick." They set off at a canter toward the inner pink shape. Hoofbeats followed them, and Helena turned to see Pasiel, reins flying in the wind. They soon reached a woman. The birds flew farther away, some waited out of reach, others headed to the village. She had been mutilated almost beyond recognition and left for dead. But Helena knew her. Moaning softly, she slid from the horse and whispered, "Ariana." Kneeling beside her only friend in the village, Helena cried and whipped her coat from her back, shivering not from the brisk fall morning, but from what had been done to the girl. There was a gaping hole where her nose had been. Her ears were severed. Ariana's large gray eyes stared up at the sky with the pupils dilated. She blinked. Lena touched her cheek, whispering, "Ariana," again. As she pulled her hand away, it was red with blood, covering her friend's nakedness with her cloak. Helena turned to Valimir with rage. "Who? Why? Who could do this?" She shouted at him, holding nothing back. "How can you be with them, those murderers? Is this what you do?" His eyes were fixed. He dismounted and stood beside her. "Don't judge me. I change what I can and accept the rest. But no, I don't kill like this." Tears were in her eyes. "I wish I could hate you, but I can't. You make my heart hurt. Did you know that? Why do we have to meet this way? Why are you with the Huns?" He knelt, his arm cradling her shoulders. "Who can question the gods? Accept what has happened. There's no other choice." He pulled her to him, gently away from Ariana. "We can do nothing for her. We must go. I won't abandon her to the birds. She's dead, or good as dead, Helena. It won't matter if you watch her die." She cried, moving back to her friend. "No, I can help her. She'd hate you if she lived. Look at her face. Come away." "I can't leave her to die alone. By Mithras, if I didn't care for you." "You do what, Valimir? Leave me with her for the birds and the wolves?" He smiled foolishly. He smiled ruefully. "Don't be foolish." She began to cry. "I don't understand what I feel for you. It's impossible. Nothing good could come from the way we've met." "You think I have an answer, Lena? When I first saw you, I felt something. It hasn't changed. It's become stronger. When I'm with you, no matter the words spoken, my heart is glad." She closed her eyes and whispered, "Mine too. I'll get the wagon for your friend." His roan cantered back to Karachapan, but Pasiel stayed and grazed the long grass. Lena listened to the wind and the birds. On the other side of the ridge, a solitary wolf howled, signaling its pack. "I love him, Ariana. I don't know why." The girl clutched her hand. Her eyes wide, Lena leaned closer. "Oh, I'm going to take care of you. You'll be safe now. You'll be all right." But the girl moved her head slightly from side to side in mild disagreement. "I'm so sorry, Ariana. So sorry." Ariana's throat gurgled. "Be well, Helena." Then she shuddered. Her eyes were open and unblinking, her body still. Helena moaned. A wolf's cry pierced the chill air. She stared at nothing and buried her head in her hands. Valimir returned quickly ahead of Karachapan. His horse stopped a few feet from Pasiel, who laid back his ears and squealed, kicking out with a hind leg. We studied the remains. It's for the best. Lena was quiet. When she spoke, her voice was soft. I know. He said slowly. Her body felt heavy, suddenly old. Your cloak, Vladimir said. Ariana needs it. I have nothing else to give. He shrugged, his nonchalance at odds with the scowl on his face. I have one you can use. I can't stand to leave her like this. We're far behind the tribe. He shouted, Karatapan, go back, we're coming. The servant waved and turned the wagon in a semicircle. Vladimir glanced at the sky with exasperation. He dismounted and pulled Lena firmly away from the body. It's better that she's in the open. It's cleaner. The birds will have her, and that's nature's way. Without a word, he reached down to Ariana and closed her wide-open eyes. He hesitated and pulled the worn garment over the corpse's face, leaving the legs exposed. Lena cried, grief coming from her heart. What if there are more survivors? What if there are children? There were babies. No one's left. This much I know. They burned it. It's gone, as if it had never been. He lifted her to his horse, placing her near the withers. Catching Pasiel's reins, he mounted behind her and made a sound that was a cross between a hiss and a cluck. The roan sprang to a run. Pasiel stretched out beside him. In no time they reached Karatapan. Vladimir shouted to him, Hurry! The pack horses broke into a canter. Despite his impatience, Vladimir stayed alongside, rather than leaving Karatapan to fend for himself. Without Valdimir's arm around her waist, Helena was lulled by the rocking motion of the canter. The arm felt crisp against her face. The horizon was boundless, the rolling steppes a world apart from the bustle of civilization. The birds called, a hare showed a hesitant nose before darting away, a fox poked his head from his den. It was morning, and life continued, completely indifferent to Helena's renewed sorrow. All at once she felt hostile. The clouds should be black, or at least gray. Instead, the sun shone and the sky was bright blue. She wanted to curse the perfect day, yet she did not. The memory of the hollow laughter echoing in her mind disturbed her. She tried not to dwell on it and somehow understood that even thought would bring it close. She concentrated on her breathing, seeking a narrow focus to dispel her dread. Missing the limited protection of her old cloak, she felt the cold. She was glad that she had been able to give Ariana's corpse something, anything to cover it. Soon they caught sight of the other wagons. Leaving Karatapan to join them, Vladimir increased his pace, riding ahead toward the horsemen, wrapped in a distant cloud of dust. Lena listened to the Pasiel breathing hard. It worried her. In contrast, Vladimir's roan ran easily, rushing to join the others. As he closed the gap, Lena tried to think of Ariana. The image of the mutilated body and the ruined face lingered, haunting her. Involuntarily, she trembled. Vladimir tightened his arm around her waist. Don't be afraid. She blinked back hot tears. A rider veered off from the group, galloping toward them. As Vladimir joined them, he laughed and shouted, Catch your bride? Maybe you were too hard on her last night. Vladimir ignored his teasing. Has Hilja found someone else yet, Bevian? She seemed dissatisfied when I saw her with you. Everything's fine between us, he retorted, glancing at Helena. His blue eyes were curious. Helena, Thudimir called. She turned, ready to lash out at him. She needed any excuse to escape the turmoil that was escalating with each stride that brought them closer to the Huns. His face was drawn from repressed feeling. Don't worry. I'll help Vladimir keep you safe. Thank you, Bevian, Vladimir said. You're good to your new sister. Looking away quickly, Thudimir could not meet his brother's eyes. Instantly, he reminded Helena of a guilty child, young and vulnerable. Vladimir guided them left rather than away from the center of the band. The dust was thick, choking her. From the right, Isjait joined them. Where do we break for camp? He asked. We keep heading north to a wide stream, many leagues from here. The Hun smiled. Good, I'll spread the word. Like Grulia, his face was marked with scars, yet for Helena he was different. He seemed almost human. They rode for hours, the sun still bright, was far past its midday peak, but Volomir's roan plunged forward. The only evidence of carrying a double load all day was his lathered neck. Alina felt numb from exhaustion. In a loud voice, struggling to cut above the noise of the wind, she said, "I should ride Pasiel. Your horse is tired." He laughed. "You'd fall off. You're in no condition to ride, maybe tomorrow." In time, Helena's eyes drooped. Her dreams returned her to the village. Alone with Ivan on his father's bed, she was terrified. With his hands and body, he pressed against her, pinning her down. She tried to scream, but her mouth wouldn't open. Her arms were useless, curiously immobile. Her heart thudded loudly, keeping time with her panic. Before her eyes, Ivan's face lengthened and transformed into the head of a wolf. As he spoke to her, his breath was foul and reeked of death. "It's all your fault, bitch. My head's gone, stolen. This is all I have left." His lips were on hers, drooling, and she awoke with a start. The sun was low in the sky, obscured by orange and purple clouds, stretching out the shadows of the horses and their riders. "We'll stop soon," Valimir said. Her voice was an exhausted murmur. "Thank God." They rode in silence. Lena nearly fell asleep again, but fearing her dreams, she forced her eyes to remain open. As the sun set, Valimir reined his roan to a halt and raised his right hand. The horsemen created more dust as they stopped to listen. He pointed to a glistening stream, at least 200 horse lengths ahead. "We camp. Tomorrow we reach Attila. Sleep. Rest your horses. First light will come soon." The men roared their approval. They did not rush to the water. Then they made their horses walk, cooling them down a little before letting them drink. From a distance, Lena saw Julia. His eyes met hers. As she stared at him, a chill spread through her. She thought of Ariana and how she'd been mutilated. An image of the Huns staked to the ground, spread eagle with knives puncturing his hands and feet, his blood spilling from his groin, came to her mind. He looked away. Repulsed at herself, she felt no victory, only grief, tightening her throat and soaking into her body. The satisfaction of Julia's slow death would not bring back Mikhail's laughter, or even Ariana's shy smile. Though Valomir's horse had brought her far, he had not carried her any distance at all from her searing anguish. It lingered, catching her by surprise and stalking her through memories. She struggled against helplessness, refusing to be engulfed. Her hand clutched the roan's mane. "I never heard you call your horse anything. Has he a name?" She waited. Valomir's answer had become important beyond its significance. The silence was killing her with a wordless scream. If only he would talk. It would go away, at least momentarily. "I call him Hassan." "That's not Gothic." It suits him. Gratchpan used it first and has stayed with the brute ever since. Behind his brusque words, Helena sensed affection in Valomir's voice. Somehow it eased her distress. At the stream, they dismounted. Valimir led her to a large gray rock. While within sight of the men, they were well upstream from their band. With his hands on hers, he made her sit. "Rest. Gratchpan will come soon." She watched. He took off Hassan's saddle and rubbed down his coat that was wet with sweat. But soon Alina's exhaustion recaptured her. She resting her head against the rock, she fell asleep and saw nothing more. So, you know, it's a pretty terrible thing what happened to Ariana, but it's never good. What can I say? This is what happened. I mean, there's terrible brutality in the world in the 400s, and I think even today you have terrible things happening. It's just how I saw it, and so next week won't be such a hard chapter, I promise. So, and my camera is working, so I will see you next week. If you dying to hear what happens next, you can go check it out on Kindle too. Take care. Have a good week. Bye bye.